Hello, hello. We are going to talk about circumference of a circle and the arc length of a portion of the circle today. So let's get started. Circumference of a circle is another formula you should have somewhere in your memory banks, even though it's been a while. The circumference of a circle is pi times diameter. But since diameter is just 2 radii, you might also see this as 2 pi r, 2 pi times the radius. They both mean the same thing. I usually do circumference equals pi times diameter, but that's just me. You can either use pi d, or 2 pi r. So let's get started. Here's my circle. Don't forget, here's my diameter all the way across, and here's my radius halfway across. Now, find the circumference of a circle with a radius of 7. Okay, well, if I want the circumference, which is pi times diameter, I'm going to realize that if my radius is 7, that my diameter is 14. So the circumference of this circle is going to be pi times 14, which we usually write as 14 pi. And there's your circumference in terms of pi. If you want your circumference as a decimal, you can just type it into your calculator and get 43.98, which if I rounded to the nearest tenth would be 44.0. So that is approximately 44.0. And that would just be regular units, not square units, because this is length and not area. Number 2, find the circumference of a circle with an area of 16 pi. Okay, well, if I want circumference, I need pi times diameter. They didn't give me the diameter, but they did tell me that the area is 16 pi. So I know 16 pi is equal to pi r squared, which means my radius was 4. Because if I divide both sides by pi, I know 16 equals r squared. And then if we square root both sides, I get a radius of 4. So if my radius is 4, then my diameter is twice that. My diameter is 8. So the circumference would be pi times 8, or 8 pi. Last but not least, it says the circumference is 40 pi. Find the area. Okay, so if circumference is 45, find the area. Well, if I want the area, I need to know pi r squared. So I really need to find the radius. Then they tell me the circumference is 40 pi. So I know 40 pi is pi times diameter, which means my diameter is 40. But to do the area formula, I need the radius. So if my diameter is 40, my radius is 20. So the area of this circle would be pi times 20 squared, which is 400 pi. Ta-da! So that's the circumference. Now, what if instead of the whole circle, you just wanted part of it, and you wanted the circumference, but just a little piece along the edge? We call that arc length. So arc length is our way of saying a portion of the circumference. So in this picture, the arc length would be this length right here, S. Now, since S is a portion of the circumference, the formula for arc length is really just a fraction of the entire circumference. So S, the arc length, is some fraction of pi d. Well, what fraction is it? It's the same fraction as this theta is out of 360. So just like the area of a sector, the arc length of a sector just starts with theta over 360 times pi d. So there's really only 2 formulas you need to memorize. Pi r squared is area, pi d is circumference. And if you don't want all of the area or all of the circumference, you just multiply by theta over 360. Let's do some examples. Number 1 says find the length of the arc of the shaded sector shown. Shaded sector shown, that's like a tongue twister. So I want the length of that. Well, this is 120 degrees, so that's a third of the circle. So if I want the length of the arc, that's going to be S equals theta over 360 times pi d. In this case, instead of theta over 360, I'm going to just say 1/3 because I know 120 is 1/3 of the circle, times pi times diameter this time. So if 9 is my radius, 18 is my diameter. 1/3 of 18 is 6. So the arc length is 6 pi. This distance right here is 6 pi. Number 2, find the perimeter of Pac-Man. Okay, so if I want the perimeter of Pac-Man, I want not only the arc length, but I also want these two segments here. So find the perimeter of Pac-Man if his mouth has a radius of 5. Okay. And it's open at an angle of 50 degrees. Cool. All right, so far in my perimeter, I know I have 2 5s, but then I also need this arc length S for this back piece. If his mouth is open at 50 degrees, that means this is 310 back here, so S is 310 360ths of pi d. Now, S is not going to be a pretty number, so I'm going to get it as a decimal. So I need 310 360ths times pi times 10. And that is 27.05, so I'm going to call it 27.1. So then my perimeter is 5 plus 5 plus 27.1, which is 37.1. And last, but certainly not least, find the arc length, the arc length of the shaded section is 15 pi. So this right here is 15 pi. Find the radius. All right, so arc length is angle over 360 times pi d. The arc length is 15 pi, so I'm going to put that 15 pi here. And that's 60 360ths times pi d. Well, 60 out of 360 is really 1/6. So if I multiply by 6, I have pi d equals 90 pi. If I divide both sides by pi here, I would get d equals 90. The question says find the radius of the circle. So if my diameter is 90, each radius is 45. Now, I feel the need to take a quick ending second here to say, what if that 60 over 360 wasn't so nice and I had this? Another way of going about solving this is dividing both sides by pi, which really just cancels them out. And then to solve for d, I need to get rid of this fraction. So what I'm doing is I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction. So if you ever want to get rid of a fraction, you can multiply both sides by its reciprocal, because these 60s and 360s would both divide to 1 and cancel out. And then over here, you would do 15 times 360 60ths. And you'd still get 90. Okay, so long story short, when you're solving for that, you can multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction that's in your way. And la-ti-da, we are done. I hope it made sense. Reach out to your teachers if you need anything.